Hey everybody, how you doing today? Today I want to talk about a comment that was left on one of my videos that I posted a few days ago. Now, overwhelmingly, the comments on this particular video were positive, very positive. There was, however, one dissenting view on this video. I'm not going to identify the commenter, but I do want to respond to what they said because a lot of what they said was just inaccurate. So, what did they say? Before I respond to this person, I just want to give a little bit of background in case there's anybody viewing this video who doesn't know my background. I was in law enforcement in Canada for 34 and a half years, 33 and a half of which were with the RCMP. During that time, I went to a lot of homicides, a lot of suicides, anything relating to a death, the RCMP, the police of jurisdiction went to. I also come from a law enforcement family. Both my brothers are in law enforcement. One is with Border Services. The other was with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police as well. We have both retired. My father was also with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He spent 22 years with the RCMP, and then he retired and became a Crown prosecutor. So we do have an extensive law enforcement background in my family. I only say this to give you a bit of perspective as to why I have some experience speaking on this topic. I also teach the Canadian Firearms Safety Course, which is a course developed by the Canadian government, and it is the course that you need, the prerequisite that you need to get your firearms license. And I also compete in several firearms-related sports. In addition to that, while I was in the RCMP, I was a firearms verifier. So one of the comments this person left was, matter of fact, the first one, having a gun in the home increases the chances for accidental injury, homicide, and suicide. Then they go on to say all of which outweighs the potential protection benefits of firearms. Let's address that here. Let's address the accidents here. Prior to the 1970s and in the 1970s, you would hear on the news, on the radio, and on the television of these horrific tragedies where somebody would get a firearm, someone who was not qualified to possess a firearm would get a firearm, and a tragedy would happen. Like a young kid would be playing around the house, open up a drawer, find a loaded firearm, and a tragedy would occur. You would hear that occasionally back in the 70s. Partly in response to this, the Canadian government brought in licensing and safe storage laws. Now, accidental deaths by firearm is right around 4%. Right around 4%, 4 or 5%. That's on average. So that has really significantly decreased. Why? Because of safe storage and handling laws and also licensing. You find primarily where things go bad is in homes where firearms have been illegally purchased, are illegally in the home. So they're not in the homes of licensed firearms users. So what about homicides and suicides? 80% of all the firearms related deaths per year in Canada, on average, because this does vary, are suicides. What I find very disturbing is that people will distinguish suicide from suicide with firearms. Why? The person is still just as dead. And why this is very concerning is to bring this stat up as it relates to Canada is, first off, it's not a Canadian statistic. It is a statistic that is relevant south of the border, because south of the border they don't have licensing. Their process for getting a firearm is considerably easier. They don't need to take a course, and they don't have continuous eligibility. Those are very important distinctions between Canada and the United States. In Canada, we also have safe storage rules, as I mentioned before. So I want to refer now to some statistics. So this statistic, it's a little dated. It's from 2019, and it's on Wikipedia, so take that for what it's worth. I'll link the Wikipedia page in the description. Canada ranks 67th of all countries for rates of suicide, with 10.3 suicides per 100,000. Tragic, very tragic. What countries have higher suicide rates, and what do they look like as far as firearms ownership? Australia ranks 57, 10 countries worse than Canada, 11.3 suicides per 100,000. And they have stricter firearms regulations, but they have more suicides. Japan, and I've lived in Japan, I know this for a fact, is very anti-firearm. It's very difficult to get a firearm in Japan. They rank 49th. So they are almost 20 countries worse than Canada, with 12.2 suicides per 100,000. South Korea is 12th. South Korea is 12th. And they have 21.2 suicides per 100,000. Belgium is 35th. They have 13.9 suicides per 100,000. Those are all countries that have stricter gun laws than Canada. So what about countries that have less strict gun laws than Canada? Switzerland is ranked 72. So it's a little bit better than Canada, and it has 9.8 suicides per 100,000 people. In Switzerland, you have to spend 18 months in the military when you turn 18 or when you graduate from high school. And you take your firearm home with you when you leave the military. And I think they practice once a year. It's almost a festival type atmosphere where they have these shooting qualification days. And they have less suicides per capita than Canada. So what about the use of firearms in suicides? I did go to the Justice Canada website for this information, and I'll link it in the description below. This article by Justice Canada essentially says that they cannot link the availability of firearms to whether or not a person will commit suicide. The main question is whether the increased availability of firearms is more likely to facilitate completed suicides. If it does, the overall rate of firearm ownership should be related to the rate of suicide. So far, however, the evidence about that particular hypothesis is contradictory and most inconclusive. And that was by Gabor in 1994, his study. It goes on, even when someone has access to a firearm, that person does not necessarily choose it to commit suicide. In a study in 1995, Rich and Young concluded that removing one available method may not offer much in the way of protection in individual cases. So what they're saying is, if a firearm is not available, the studies are showing that it's not going to affect whether or not a person commits suicide. So why don't we take a look at homicides? In the comment, the commenter said Canada has a third highest rate of firearms homicides. This is something else that I really discourage people from doing, is talking about firearms homicides as opposed to homicides. Because if a person wants to commit a homicide, they're going to commit it. If they use a firearm, so be it, but they will find another method of committing homicides. As I said before, I teach the Canadian Firearm Safety course. One of the things we teach in that course are the statistics on firearms-related homicides. Firearms are used in approximately a third, maybe even a little less than a third, of homicides. Knives are used in a third, and other methods are used in about a third. So blunt force trauma, poisoning, whatever. Also, between 65 to 75%, depending on the year, of homicides where firearms are used are gang related. None of those people have firearms licenses. Of the remaining 25 to 35%, most of those homicides where firearms are used were by people who did not have a license. Licensed firearms owners are among the most law-abiding citizens in Canada. The reason being is if they commit a crime, they lose their license. If the firearms that are being used are brought into the country illegally, are being used by people who are not licensed, how will taking firearms away from licensed firearms users have any effect on that? It won't. Another comment that this person made was that firearms are rarely used in self-defense and you're more likely to be injured or not be able to use the firearm. Well, first off, in Canada, because of the safe storage rules, you're probably not going to be able to get to your firearm. However, I'm going to tell you a story in just a bit which contradicts this. One thing that contradicts this statement is a study done by the CDC on, and that was commissioned by President Obama during his presidency. I used to have it, and if I find it, I will link it in the description. But I have read it. I can testify as to its authenticity. And in that study, it showed that between 500,000 and 3 million defensive uses of firearms happened every year in the United States. Now, defensive uses of firearms, that's also something we need to talk about. That doesn't mean a firearm was discharged. It means it was used in a defensive manner. So the presence of a firearm could actually de-escalate a situation. And that happened to me once. So the situation was this. I had gone on vacation. I'd come down to the Lower Mainland in British Columbia from a posting that I had in northern Alberta. During this trip, I brought my personal firearm with me, a handgun, and that I was going to bring to the range and shoot with my family members. I don't know if we ended up going shooting or not, I can't remember. But I had all the proper permits, and I was transporting the firearm in a legal manner according to the regulations. On my way back to Alberta, I was driving in the middle of the night because I'm a bit of an insomniac. I was driving this old pickup truck. It had cost me like $750. While I was driving, there was nobody else on the road except for one vehicle that came up behind me and was right on my bumper. And I was getting quite annoyed because it was the middle of the night, no other vehicles around. Why doesn't this person just pass? So I decided to pull over when I had the chance. There was this pull off. I pulled over and I expected this person to drive on by, but they didn't. They came in right behind me with their high beams on. This highway is known as the Highway of Tears or the Highway of Death in Canada because a lot of people, mainly females, have gone missing over the years, and there is a belief that several serial killers have worked those highways during the years. I realized after a second or two what was about to happen. I was about to be robbed. Or worse, I could have been killed. I don't know. I knew I couldn't outrun this person in my old pickup truck. So I slid the seat forward because it was a standard cab pickup truck. I reached behind the seat and I brought my gun case over the seat. And I started struggling with the key because it wasn't a very good gun case. And I knew that it would be a miracle if I got the gun out and got it loaded, loaded the magazine and whatnot. I knew it was, a an uphill battle because there's also a trigger lock on it. But when I brought that gun case over the seat, whoever was in the vehicle behind me realized what was about to happen. I was going to put up a fight, and I had a gun. They didn't know that I was struggling to get it out of the case, and that I probably wouldn't have been able to. But they realized they were in for it, and they took off. On that night, even though I did not even present the gun, the presence of a gun in my civilian life saved me from being robbed and possibly saved my life. So these things do happen in Canada. And there are cases of self-defense in Canada where firearms are used. So even if the statistics say that it's unlikely you will be able to deploy a firearm and use it for self-defense, that doesn't mean you should be deprived of the opportunity to try and save your life with a firearm. So in conclusion, a lot of these stats that they quoted here don't apply to Canada. So I hope you've gotten something out of this video. Please hit like and subscribe, hit the bell notification, share it with your friends, and we'll see you on the next video.